Greetings, students. Welcome you all to this week 2 video. This week we are going to discuss about the research process from Unit 1. So let me share the PPT for you. Yeah. So in week 1 we have discussed with the meaning of research and the significance of research, objectives of research, and what are the criteria for a good research. And then we have also discussed various types of research. So in the same unit, in week 2, we are going to discuss about the research process. Okay, so the entire research process, stepwise, we are going to study in this week. So let us begin with the research process. So the topics to be covered here is process of research. Under process of research, we have management problem, then defining the research problem, formulating the research hypothesis, developing the research proposals, designing the research methodology, sampling design, planning and collecting the data for research, data analysis and interpretation, research applications in business decisions, and features of a good research study. So let us now begin with research process. So we have many diagrams given in many of the books. So I have mentioned here two of the research process. Any of the flow diagram can be followed. Both are same. So the research process, as we have discussed, what is research? Research means it is a very systematic and scientific way of investigation. So here in research process, so we have a order of or a sequence of steps which needs to be followed. Okay, so if at all it is followed in the same sequence, then you can say the research is systematic. Okay, so we'll discuss these steps in order research process. So the first step is defining and formulating the problem. Second step is developing a working hypothesis. Third is developing a research proposal. And once the proposal is ready, you can start planning for the research methodology. So once the research methodology is prepared, pilot testing can be done, and the improvements in the instruments which we have planned to collect the data can be done. And once it is approved, data collection can be started. Once the data is collected, you can start data analysis and finally hypothesis testing. So once the testing is done, you can report the results in the form of a research report. So this is one flowchart regarding the research process. And as per C.R. Kothari textbook, this is the most popular flowchart, which involves 7 steps here, same steps. So starting from defining the research problem, then second step will be reviewing the literature, right? Third step will be formulating the hypothesis, followed by designing the research methodology, data collection, data analysis, and interpretation and reporting. So these are the 7 steps involved in research process. So let us now begin with each step here. So first step is identifying and formulating the problem. So problem is the topic which you have identified, the issue which you have identified for your research work. Okay, so the problem formulation is very important, very key to the research process. For a researcher, the research formulation or the problem formulation means converting the management problem to a research problem. So in the problem, an organization will be facing with some difficulties. It will be undergoing some problems. So that management problem has to be converted to research problem so that further research can be carried out. So as it is said, half if you clearly define the problem, 50% of your research work is done. The rest 50% is only to plan, use, select the methods, and execute it. So identifying the problem and formulating the problem rightly is very, very important step. So the first step is formulating the problem. For example, management problem will take. So the organization, the management is facing a problem. It wants to increase the sale of product A. Okay, how do you convert that into a research problem? So what is the current standing of product A will be the research problem, or you can say research question. Okay, so you have to first identify what is the current standing of product A, and based on that, how you can work upon to formulate some strategies to increase the sales of the product A. Okay, so this is there is a famous saying that problem well defined is half solved. As I told you, if you identify the problem properly, half of your problem is itself is solved. The rest 50% is only executing your plan. So, defining the research problem. So, as I told you, what is a research problem? It is in general refers to some difficulty which a researcher is experiencing in the context. Maybe either a theoretical problem or maybe a practical situation, and he or she wants a solution to solve that particular problem. So, this is a research problem, right? So, any difficulty, any concern which a researcher is experiencing in the context of theoretical or practical situation and want a solution for it. That is a research problem, right? So why it is important to define the problem? As I told you, it is one of the most important steps in any of the research. So it involves stating the general problem and then identifying specific components of the research problem. So only when the research problem is clearly defined, a research plan can be designed and execution will be proper. Okay, of all the tasks in the marketing research, more vital and ultimate fulfillment of client need than a proper definition of a requires a proper definition of a research problem. So all the effort, time, money, whatever is spent on this point will be wasted if the problem is misunderstood or it is incompletely defined. Okay, so all the energy, effort, and time we'll be spending in executing our research, which will go in vain if we do not describe the problem properly. And suppose the problem definition is inadequate, it might lead to the cause of failure in the research projects. So whatever the projects you would have taken up might be a failure. So the time, complete time which you have used to implement or to carry out the investigation might go in vain again. So better communication and more involvement in problem definition are most important mentioned ways of improving the usefulness of the research. So how do you define the problem? What is the process involved in it? Right? So first is you can have a discussion with the decision makers. You can interview with the experts, people who have knowledge about that particular issue, and you can do the secondary data analysis part. You can also do a qualitative research. Okay, the various tasks through which you can identify the problem properly, right? Then from all these sources, you define the environmentally context of the problem and you will have a definition, problem definition. So first define what is the management decision problem, then convert that into a research problem. So how do you develop? The next step is, sorry, once this process of defining the problem is done, here the secondary data analysis is involved, wherein you do literature search also. So through the literature, you will identify the gap and it will help you to identify the variables also that can be taken for your research work. Once it is done, it can be used to develop or formulate a hypothesis. So what is this working hypothesis? This hypothesis is nothing but a tentative assumption, a tentative statement regarding the solution to the problem under study. So the kind of data to be collected and the tool of analysis are all influenced by the hypothesis. So this is a predictive statement which a researcher thinks it might be a solution to the problem. Okay, so usually hypothesis two hypotheses will be written for one particular situation. So to write a hypothesis again you require minimum of two variables. So these variables would have been identified through secondary data analysis or discussion with the expert members. So using that it will help us to write a hypothesis. So usually we write two hypothesis statements. One is null hypothesis, the other one is alternate hypothesis. So null hypothesis is denoted as H naught and alternate hypothesis is denoted as HA. Okay, if at all there are number of statements to be written, then the alternate hypothesis can be written as H1, H2, H3 like that. Right? For every alternate hypothesis, you will have a null hypothesis to be written. And in one single hypothesis statement, you will be having two variables, one independent variable and the other one dependent variable. So dependent variable will be depending on the independent variable. So this independent variable will have an effect on the dependent variables. Okay, so using those variables, hypothesis statements will be written in the beginning. So this stage is called working hypothesis formulation, right? So this will guide us to further carry out the research process. So once the hypothesis is ready, then we'll move on to the next step, right? So this is the flow chart. How do we test actually the hypothesis? This comes in the later part of the syllabus. So test of hypothesis, you have many tests like parametric test and non-parametric test. So whichever is feasible and suitable for the study has to be decided and chosen for the analysis part. So important parametric test, what I told, includes that test, t-test, chi-square test, and f-test, right? In case of non-parametric test, you have ransom test, KW test, U test. All these are non-parametric. There are various parametric and non-parametric tests. Very frequently used and popularly used methods are these methods. Any of the methods which are suitable for the study can be chosen. So once it is ready, the research proposal has to be drafted. So this research proposal is nothing but a brief summary. So it is a brief summary outlining the research objectives, the proposed methodology, and what are the benefits of this particular study, along with a detailed bibliography. So this research proposal, it will act like a roadmap to the researcher, showing where the researcher has to start and where it has to go and how it has to get there and how it has to reach the goal. So this research proposal, as I told you, it is a summary or an outline through which it guides the researcher to carry out the research. So now coming to research design. Sometimes and research design is also called as research methodology. So here we have to decide the components of research design. Right? In research methodology, the first thing what we are going to discuss is which type of research we are carrying out. So we have discussed types of research in the last week's class. So there are many types of research, right? Basically exploratory, descriptive, or uh, causal research or experimental research. So while designing the research methodology, the first thing a researcher has to do is he has to identify which type of study they are doing, because for each type of research there are different methodologies to be used. So that we are going to discuss in the next week's class. So if at all it is an exploratory research, for example, if the researcher wants to find out the causes for the decline in the sales of the company's product in a specific territory under a specific salesman. So the researcher wants to explore the reasons for the decline in the sales. So this becomes an exploratory research. So there might be many factors which are causing the decline in the sales. Might be like faulty product planning, higher price, less discount, less offers, less availability, insufficient or inefficient salesmanship, poor quality of salesmanship, or less awareness about the product, and so on. So, not all the factors are responsible for the decline in the sales. So, you have to explore the factors and then narrow down the options through conclusive research. Okay, only one or two factors are responsible for decline in the sales. That needs to be identified, and different type of research has to be undertaken. Okay, so here in research design, once you have decided on which type of research you are doing, then you have to think of the sampling design. So who are your population, to whom you are going to collect the data, who will serve as your sample. Okay, so population is nothing but the entire elements or units which comes under your study, which you want to study, right? A sample is a small part or a subset of the population. Since a population size will be very huge, Covering the entire unit or the elements of population will be a tough and tedious task. So a sample would be drawn, a small sample size would be drawn from the population, which is a true representative of the population. So in the sampling, while designing the sampling design, it has to be taken. While designing the sampling process, we have to take care like who is our population as I told you and who is our sample, how many sample we have to take. So how do we decide on sample size? We have different formulas to calculate the sample size. If at all the population size is known, if it is finite, then we have a formula to calculate the sample size. And if at all the population size is indefinite, we don't know the size, then we have a different formula to calculate the sample size. So based on this calculation, we'll arrive at a number. So that would serve as our sample size. So we will draw only those many samples from the entire population. Right. So we know the sample size and we know the population. So population is denoted as capital N and sample is denoted as small n. So since we know the sample size, but how do we draw that sample from the population? There should be some methods involved, techniques involved to draw the sample. But we should use some statistical techniques, scientific techniques to draw the sample because there should not be any bias during the sample selection. So this would, if there is a bias, it would lead to some inaccuracy in the results. So what we have to do is we have to either switch on to probability sampling techniques or non-probability sampling techniques, right? So in probability, we have again different methods like simple random sampling technique, systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling, and we have cluster sampling. So any one of these methods can be selected. If at all we choose probability random sampling, as I told you, there are four methods. So simple random sampling, we either go by lottery method or we use random number table method. Or if at all go for systematic sampling, we calculate the k value, the difference between each element, and systematically we select the sample from the population. And stratified, if you want to create strata, strata means group, the different stratas of each strata having the typical characteristic, then it can be grouped into different stratas. And clusters, sometimes even you have to form a group of different elements having different characteristics within a particular cluster. That can also be used to draw the sample. And if at all non-probability sampling technique is used, we have again convenience sampling method, judgment sampling method, quota sampling, and so snowball sampling method. So if at all we go by convenience, it will be as per the convenience of the researcher and also as per the convenience of the um, availability of the respondents. Then, if at all we go by judgmental or purposeful, it is intentional in the sense as per the preference of the researcher, the elements will be picked from the population. Again, the bias will be involved here. And we have quota sampling wherein researcher reserves a specific category, a percentage within the study. And if at all we go for the snowball sampling, it is just like a chain link where we keep on collecting the references from one person to the other. So usually it is preferred to go for probability sampling technique since there is no bias involved in that. So once we have identified which method to select the sample, as I told you, based on the availability, feasibility of the study, you can decide on these two types. Once it is decided, the sample can be drawn. Right? Then the data collection process has to be started. So how do you collect the data? What are the methods that are available? There are various methods available. Like in data collection also, if you do you want primary data to be collected or do you want secondary data to be collected? So if at all you want primary data, you can either go for interview, questionnaire, schedules, observations, all these things. Or if at all you want secondary data analysis, you can read the journal articles, newspapers, textbooks, magazines, then government websites, government reports, company reports. All these will serve as the secondary data sources, right? So based on the requirement, you can choose the instrument. We call it as instrument for data collection. So once the instrument is ready, suppose we decide the questionnaire, we are going for a questionnaire. So whether we'll go for a structured questionnaire or unstructured questionnaire, right? So when we are designing the questionnaire, also we should take care of how do we approach, whether the audience, who are my audience, whether they'll be able to understand my question or not, how should be the question structured, how should be the wordings of the questions. All these things has to be decided, and once the questionnaire has been designed, it has to be administered to the respondents. How are you going to do that? Whether it is through face-to-face personal interview, or it is through mail, or it is through post, it has to be decided. Once that is done, data collection has to be started, right? How do we start the data collection? As I told you, using questionnaires, you start collecting the data. So now the data is with us. The next step in the research process is data analysis or data processing, right? So the data what we collect is a raw data, right? Now the data has to be converted into information. So until and unless it is an information, we cannot draw conclusions or we cannot write the inferences. So how do we convert that raw data into information? So the process involved here is, it has four steps again here: editing, coding, we have classification also, and then tabulation. Finally we'll be doing the statistical analysis. So in the editing part, we will scan the questionnaires to see that all the responses are complete. There are no incomplete responses, right? And all the respondents are able to follow the instructions and they are able to understand it the same way, right? And any additions, deletions can be done in the editing part. In coding, once editing is done, coding, we try to code, assign some numbers or symbols to the options, to the answers in the questionnaire. So once the coding is done, we try to put all the classified data in the form of a table. That is called tabulation. So we have different kinds of tabulation. A simple tabulation is one-way tabulation where you analyze only one variable. In case if you have more than one variable, you can have a cross tabulation. So at a time you can have two or more variables being showcased in a table form, right? So after tabulation, it will be very easy for the statistical analysis. So this is the last stage, and the tabulated data will be analyzed using various techniques like average percentage, trend analysis, correlation, regression techniques, etc. Here, either we can use other parametric and non-parametric tests also, right? So once the data is ready, information is ready for processing, the now we have to test the hypothesis. So we have already written the working hypothesis in the beginning, right? Now that hypothesis has to be tested, right, to prove or to disprove it. So what we will do, we will use the statistical test, right? As I told you, parametric or non-parametric test can be done to check whether the hypothesis stated is right or wrong, right? If at all it is right, you can say you are accepting the hypothesis. If at all it is not, it doesn't hold good, you can say it doesn't hold good. Once it is done, you have to write the interpretation and generalizations has to be drawn. So data can be interpreted, as I told you, based on the results. You have to write your own interpretation, explanation for that particular answer for the results, right? And finally, these will help us to generalize for the entire population, and these generalization would help us to further build a new theory or a concept, right? So here, till this, the research process happens. Finally, once everything is done, you have to report the results. The results should be available for the common layman to read and get the clarification. So the last step is reporting the results. So the report has three parts. The first part is preliminary section. The second is the main text part, and the last one is end section. So in the preliminary section, it contains the title page, table of contents, the certificates part, then list of tables, graphs, and abstract or executive summary. In the main text of the report should contain the background statement of the problem, objectives, research design, data analysis, then your conclusion and the recommendations part. also the bibliography. And the end section will contain all the glossaries or the questionnaires, any other certificates, images, all this can be added in the end section of the report. So till here, the research process continues. If the same steps are followed in the same order, then the research what a researcher is undertaken can be said as a systematic research. So after this research process, we'll be discussing on the applications of the research in business decision. So where and all we can apply this research in business decision making. How is this research helping in taking a decision in our business scenarios, right? When if you want to gather a crucial information, if an organization want to gather a crucial information, okay, maybe from its competitors or maybe on a particular issue or a product or anything for that matter, the organization can take up an investigation, detailed inquiry, and start collecting the information, right? And whenever an organization wants to take a right decision, it doesn't want to deviate anything from the taking wrong decisions because it might affect the future work also. So whenever the organization wants to take a right decision, it can take up a research. So through research, it will get it will be there will be many alternatives available. Which will also help an organization to take a right decision at the right time. So management also can make intelligent and well-informed decisions through the help of research. But research, then also it can ascertain the success of their advertisement. Sometimes it wants to check how the advertisement is working, whether it is successful or not. Then it can undergo research. Then workers can also be trained and coached in line with the needs. So, since the marketing condition doesn't remain constant, it keeps on changing. So, workers or employees can be trained in the same line by doing the research. So, recent or current trends can be known through research. Then you will get various answers to solve a problem, and to gain some new knowledge also you can go for doing research, or you can assist this will assist for an organization whether to whom to take up as a right supplier, or what right price has to be fixed. So that decision can also be taken with the help of a research. So these are all the various fields. There are various applications in business where research can be applied. These are very few points to be discussed. And when you are saying your research is a good research, what are the things that has to be taken care? The first thing is the purpose of the research. For what purpose you are doing the research, that has to be clearly defined, right? Then, if the research process has to be detailed, right? Each step has to be in detail. And research design, as I told you, research methodology, it has to be well planned, and the same thing has to be executed. And your research should have high ethical standards applied. So there are some research ethics which is involved in the research, that moral concerns has to be taken care. And limitations, if at all any limitations in the research work, needs to be frankly revealed without any hide and seek, right? Flaws can be openly mentioned, right? And analysis, when the analysis part comes, it should be, the data which is available collected should be sufficient to take a decision, right? And the findings which are presented in the report should be unambiguous. It should be very clear, right? Clear and very precise. And conclusions, whatever the conclusions drawn, should be justifiable, right? So good researchers always specify the conditions under which their conclusions seem to be valid, right? And there are some roles of investigators. The investigator should not manipulate the data, or do not readily try to collect the data by readily accepting whoever is available, because it will give a wrong result and the wrong solution to the client, right? And while measuring also, while collecting the data also, the measuring instruments, the techniques, scaling techniques which are used should be accurate. Okay, use some scientific methods to design the instrument, and draw sample using scientific techniques only to collect the accurate data. So these are the things, and influence of measurement also, as I told you. Then pressure of time frame. Sometimes investigator might have time constraint. So to complete within the time frame might be they resort to some other unethical means that should not be done, right? And while testing hypothesis also, a proper statistical test has to be used, and whatever the result are, it has to be openly accepted. And based on the complexity of the subject also, different individuals will react with a different given stimuli. So environmental factors and the peer influence might also lead to the complexity of the subject, right? So these are all the various criteria to be fulfilled as a researcher, or the features of a good research study. So in this video, we have discussed with the research process, the various steps in the research process, and we have discussed the applications of research in business decisions, and we have also thrown some light on features of a good research study. So the detailed explanation will be taken up in the class. Thank you all for sparing your time watching this video. Thank you once again.